What is going on, everybody? We're back with some more Marvel Snap discussion. Today we had a giant balance patch hit. We've got a lot of juicy stuff to talk about, so we're going to dive right on into it. Actually, these changes hit last night, but I was sleeping, man. I'm old now. So let's talk about some changes. First, we have Arnim Zola. This is more of a functional change, but I guess you could see it as a nerf as well. Previously, if you had something like armor, I believe the main copy would not get destroyed and you'd still get 2 copies summoned. So Arnim Zola's effect has now become a conditional, meaning the card must be destroyed before Zola will summon 2 copies, which I think is fair. The text says it, so I think it's fair to assume that's required. This next one is a gigantic buff. One of the most meme unplayable cards in the game, Baron Mordo, was a 2/3. Used to be your opponent draws a card, increase its cost by 1. It did have some niche scenarios where you could increase a cost higher than 6, but that required very specific RNG of hitting a particular draw from your opponent. So now your opponent draws a card and it sets its cost to 6. So this is obviously a lot better. You can kind of screw with some of your opponent's tempo if you can hit some of their, low to mid cost cards. Obviously, if you hit a 6 cost card, it does nothing. But if your opponent was the type of deck that wants to play like 2 cards on 6, you could potentially just kind of ruin that game plan. I'm thinking of things like Deadpool Taskmaster. If you hit the Taskmaster, it's just done for. If you hit Deadpool, their deck is done for. There's a lot of decks in the game right now, Mr. Negative aside, that are trying to play a couple cards, either on turn 6 or something like that. And this can actually just screw up a lot of decks. Even things like Death Wave. I've seen a lot of Death Waves starting to pack in Moon Girl for double death. If you hit Moon Girl with Mordo, their power ceiling drops dramatically now. So Mordo has now become like one of the best disruptors in the game. You're still giving your opponent a card, but the upside of making it cost 6 is just gigantic. So I'm glad they made Mordo playable. Now he's not as horrible of a feeling when you pull him. Next up, we've got Jessica Jones. She was a 5/8 that got +2 power, but now she is a 4/4 that gets +4 power. So I think she's kind of meant to be an analog to Rescue. Rescue got changed to a 4/4 that if you play a card here next turn, you get +5 power. Jessica Jones will be a 4/4 that gets +4 power. And you may ask, why does Jessica Jones only go up to a 4/8, whereas Rescue goes up to a 4/9? My reasoning for that would probably be Rescue has a more limiting effect, meaning you play Rescue, you have to play into Rescue's location next turn. Whereas Jessica Jones, you just have to not play at her location. And while those may sound like very similar limitations, Jessica Jones gives you the option of playing at 2 other locations to still trigger her effect. So you're getting twice as many options as Rescue. So I think it's fair that Jessica Jones gets a slight power buff in exchange. I think they're both very solid 4-drops now. And I love the way Second Dinner has, and you'll see more of it in this patch, they really tried hard to make the 4 and 5 cost slots more appealing. So there's a lot of buffs to 4 and 5 cost cards in this patch. And I think that was one of the biggest things we were lacking, was making the 4 and 5 cost cards better. 6s might still need a tiny bit of love, a couple of them, but some of them got love as well. But I think the Jessica Jones play as a whole is very nice. And I think we're actually getting into a world where we could just kind of play a mid-rangey type deck and it'll work decently. So I'm happy for that. Lady Sif just got a straight cost increase. She went from a 2 cost 4 power to a 3 cost 4 power. She was one of the most consistent cards in the discard archetype. Being able to guarantee you hit your Apocalypse obviously is nice, and 4 power is kind of above. It's the top end of the power curve for a 2-drop. So I don't think she really needed a cost increase because 3 is going to be kind of slow. But it also kind of continues to distribute the types of discard across the curve for discard decks. Having Colleen and Sif on 2 was kind of a nice parallel, but now you have options on 2 and 3. But now 3 is still going to be a very crowded slot for discard between, now you have Sif, Gambit, Swordmaster, Moon Knight, I think are the 4 options. So it's a very crowded slot in discard. This is one of the ones, not that I disagree with Sif getting adjusted, I don't know if I need to see how it plays out before I can say if I agree with the change itself. So here's the biggest change, arguably, with the patch. Mr. Negative getting a power reduction, going from a 4-4 down to a 4-1. Now, obviously, if you're playing a negative deck, a lot of the times they took turns 1 through 3 almost fully off. Sometimes they drop a Sunspot if they had one. And then you'd play negative on turn 4, or you'd play negative on turn 3 if you had Psylocke. And at least negative was a decent enough turn 3 or 4 play that the rest of the game, having your cards power and cost flipped, meant that you were going to come back out ahead on the total power by the end of the game. Their goal with nerfing Mr. Negative's power down to 1 is that he is enough of a tempo loss that it's not just kind of an instant win after you get him down. We'll see how that plays out. I still am of the belief that Sarah or Magic, my preference is Magic, probably needed to get hit in addition to Mr. Negative to really bring that deck back down to earth. But I'm willing to see how this kind of attempt at leaving his effect as is but hurting the tempo plays out. Because I like Mr. Negative's effect. I think it's really cool and unique. So I would hate to see that changed. So I'm on board with trying to find a way to make him work as is. Professor X, I believe, is just like a word change. They just didn't want to list out every single effect in the game, so I think they just, the original text is here. They changed it from added, removed, or destroyed to added, removed, etc. Just because there might be more effects in the game, and moved things like that can't happen either. SpiderMan got a slight buff. He went from a 4-cost 2 power to a 4-cost 3 power. I think in general this is probably mostly inconsequential. If you were playing SpiderMan, you were probably doing something like SpiderMan into attempting to Professor X delay in the turn after, or something like that. So in general, I don't think this matters a ton, but there's probably some niche scenarios where like you SpiderMan into Professor X and your opponent plays Patriot, Blue Marvel, Spectrum, whatever, and then you wind up losing that lane. So that little touch of power, I think, could go a decent way into making sure your Spider-Man plays pay off, and while making him not too much of a tempo loss to play. Next, we've got a slight redesign for Thor, which I think is pretty cool. Thor went from a 4-6 down to a 3-4. This basically just means you get an additional turn to draw a Mjolnir, which makes Thor as a whole much more playable. And you could potentially have a 3-10 if you draw Mjolnir. I think that makes Thor pretty juicy. I think you're going to see people experimenting with Thor a lot more than they were. Whether he ultimately winds up sticking around or not remains to be seen. But with Jane Foster still being at least somewhat playable, and Thor now being a cheap, not terribly cost to power ratio 3-drop, I think he's going to see a lot of experimentation. Now we've got some 5-drop changes, which is something that I've been begging for. If you've listened to Talking Snap with me and Teddy Ninja, we've kind of railed on this quite a bit. 5-drops need to love a lot, and we've got some 5-drop love. First, Abomination just goes up to a 5-9. In general, it doesn't matter a lot, but that extra power for Patriot decks will be pretty sweet. Arrow's going to go up to a 5-8. I only really saw Arrow ever when people were trying to make it work with Kingpin. Maybe she gets more experimentation now that she has some power buffs, but more power for 5-drops is never a bad thing. My boy Black Bolt is going up to a 5-8. I still don't think it really makes him quite playable, just because turn 5 is kind of late for this effect, but I'm at least willing to mess around with him more. Now we've got some new additions to the 5-drop arsenal. We've got Blue Marvel going from a 6-4 down to a 5-3. I think this is the single most impactful change in this patch. Blue Marvel in the 5 slot, I think, is going to be really, really strong. His power dropping by 1 is really meaningless. But now you can go Blue Marvel on 5 into Onslaught on 6. Onslaught also got buffed. Or just any number of things. Blue Marvel, I think, should help token decks come back to life. Because now you can, like, not token, but kind of zoo, I guess. You play a whole bunch of 1-drops. You're going to play your Khazar on 4, Marvel on 5, and then you can play either Onslaught or Chavez on 6. You've got a lot of options now. And Blue Marvel being one of the cards you get in your Recruit Pass, I like that they're trying to make this a very strong card, and I think you're going to see Blue Marvel a lot moving forward. Next up, we've got Devil Dinosaur, changing from a 4-0 up to a 5-3. Same effect, it's just going to start with 3 power and go up 1 in cost. I think that's fair. It's still going to make him quite a strong card, and the 3 power kind of lowers his floor or raises his floor a bit, and it just gives another really heavy hitter into the 5-drop slot, and 5-drops have been needing some more heavy hitters, so I'm on board with that. Then we've got Gamora, who I think was a 4-6 that got +4 power or something like that. Now she is a 5-7 that gets +5 power, so she could potentially be a 5-12 if you hit on her location. Still kind of a conditional 5-drop, but a 5-12 is nothing to shake a stick at. So I like the Gamora change. Claw is getting his power buffed by 1, the power of his ability. So he was a 5-4 that gave the location to the right 5 power. Now he's going to give the location to the right 6 power. Obviously with Onslaught now, that goes up even more. Claw was kind of a fringe card before, but we'll see if he can make some more lists. That kind of ongoing deck hasn't really been the juice lately, regardless. Red Skull gets a 1 power buff up to a 5-15. So now if you think about it, even if you don't play Zero or any of those other abilities, if you play Red Skull out and your opponent has a full lane, they would get +8 power. So if you reduce 8 from here, worst case scenario, Red Skull is a 5-7. Not bad at all. And obviously a lot of the times he's going to be higher than that. Next up we've got Ronin. Also changed to a 5-drop, does not get the 3 power that Devil Dinosaur gets. But his ability is changed from +2 power to +3 power for each card in your opponent's hand. So that means if your opponent is rocking a full hand, Ronin can be a 5-21 just naturally. That's very strong. So I think you're going to see probably some sort of shell potentially with like Baron Mordo, Maximus, and Ronin, and just kind of trying to get payoffs like that. And I think it's going to be playable. I can't guarantee it, but I think it will be. Next up, we've got Spider-Woman. And this is the kind of change that I've actually tried to push for before. She just needs a little bit of power to make her ability worth it. And she's gone from a 4-4 to a 5-7. So now Spider-Woman's ceiling is essentially 11 total power if she hits 4 cards in her location. And just the power reduction is solid. 5-7 is like an okay body, similar to like your Black Bolts of the past. I still think ultimately she might not make the cut, but it is a much more intriguing option in the 5-drop slot now. Agatha is going to get a slight power buff up to 14. I think Agatha decks were playable before this, so I think they probably only get more playable from here on out. We got another 1 power buff for our heavy hitter Vanillas. Hulk is going to go up to a 6-12. I think that is a fair change. Patriot decks will love that even more. Onslaught goes up to a 6-7. I think outside of the crazy combo scenarios where you set up Onslaught, Mystique, and Wong all on Onslaught Citadel or something like that, those like kind of crazy high roll combos, Onslaught's kind of fallen out of favor a bit just because he was a bit slow. Even ongoing decks kind of morphed towards the current Wong going that we're seeing now, just because they were a little bit more proactive, and then Spectrum kind of buffs everything, whereas Onslaught was more or less limited to one location. So he's getting a slight power buff to make him more intriguing to play. Speaking of Spectrum, she's getting buffed as well. She's going to go up to a 6-5. Pretty decent. Wong going was already a decently strong deck, and this is only going to make it stronger. And then finally, we've got Ultron. He's getting a 1 power buff up to a 6/8. I still don't think the drones are strong enough. I think they needed to be buffed to really make Ultron worth it. But more power for 6 drops, I am never going to complain about. So that's it for the balance patch. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. What was the biggest winner of the patch? What was the biggest loser? Or what cards do you think they missed down below? But as always, thank you all very much for watching. We'll have some deck with some of these changed cards coming soon. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.